40, a bill related to the restoration of voting rights for those who have been convicted of a felony offense and are no longer locked up in a corrections facility, or for those who have never spent a day inside a correctional facility. This bill is similar to bills introduced in 2002, then by State Representative Keith Ellison, who is now our State Attorney General. Over the past 17 years, it has gained greater and greater bipartisan support, and in recent years, the Republican chair of public safety was also the chief author. House File 40 again has several Republican co-authors. It's time for Minnesota to pass this bill. Currently, roughly 62,000 people in Minnesota are under some type of felony supervision, either locked up in one of our several correctional facilities, or they are out. And roughly 53,000 Minnesotans who are in the community doing all that they can to lead their best lives. This bill would allow those convicted of a felony who are no longer locked up or have never been incarcerated to vote in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota would join 14 other states along with the District of Columbia, while we would join states like Oregon, Illinois, Massachusetts. We would also join states like Ohio, Utah, and our neighbors to the northwest, North Dakota. It's time for Minnesota to join these other states. I'm going to end my testimony because I know we have a lot of other individuals. But first, Madam Chair, I believe there are a few amendments. I have an author's amendment that I would like to put it in the statement that the author would like, but I think I'll hang for a couple seconds. And before we move on, well, no, I think we can move on now. I would move my amendment, the author's amendment, and I believe that is A1.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I think it would be in order if the chair were first to move his bill, and then we can...
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. I'll move my bill.
Okay, thank you. Chair Dean moves his bill, House File 40, and I am going to look to see where we're sending that to.
We will be returning it to government operations.
Okay, it'll be returned to office. Okay, thank you.
And then I would also at this time like to move the A1 amendment.
Okay, so Representative Dean moves his A1 amendment to House File 40 labeled A1. Does everyone have the amendment?
Just if I could state what the A1 amendment actually does. It removes Section 7, which was a repealer that was replaced earlier in an earlier version that would repeal a certain section. County attorneys came to me actually last time around, I wasn't able to correct it this time around, with concerns about that it may be more encompassing than what was originally intended. So we will leave that, we will take that repealer out of the bill and the statute will remain intact.
Okay, so getting it in the shape that you would like, thank you. Is there any discussion?
So currently we make no differentiation when individuals' rights to vote are returned to them after they have completed their probation or they have completed their supervision. And one of the things that this bill does, which is critical, and I'm sure that Secretary Simon will speak to, is it actually creates a bright line. It creates a bright line for those individuals who are locked up, are not allowed to vote. And by the way, there are 2 other states in the United States that actually allow people locked up to vote. It creates that bright line between those individuals who are inside locked up and those who are outside. And what that bright line does is it adds clarity on who can and cannot vote. And if we begin to break down every particular crime relative to that, I think it just creates tons and tons of complications. So I would ask members to vote against the A2 amendment.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I'd like to
Representative.
further elucidate on this. This is an amendment to articulate those that have committed election felonies, and I think that that's particularly salient to Chair Dean's desired outcome. So these are people who are going to be restored having committed election crimes. So once again, I think this is an important amendment, and we would urge its adoption.
And Madam Chair, I would just add to Representative Nash's comments, is currently after an individual who's been convicted of a felony for elections is able to vote after their time in supervision is done.
Now we will be taking a roll call on Amendment 2. Amendment 2. Chair Dean.
I would vote no.
Bonner, sorry. No. Representative Nash.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi. No. Representative Halverson. Representative Mann.
No.
Representative New. Representative O'Driscoll.
Yes.
Representative Halverson. And Representative New.
Members, this is again another amendment to Chair Dean has articulated he wants to have a bright line, and I believe our segment 2 would like to have a bright line of delineation if his bill were to move forward. This is for crimes of violence, and I think that that's another particularly bright line that should be defined and excluded from this. So, Madam Chair, this is a fairly important amendment, and we would urge its adoption. And if I hadn't already asked for it, I would ask for a roll call.
Yes, you did ask for a roll call. Representative Dean.
Well, Madam Chair and members, at the risk of sounding like I'm repeating myself, I'll repeat myself. Currently, we allow those individuals who have been convicted of crimes that are considered violent. When they are off supervision, they can currently vote. So again, it would create confusion at the polls, and I believe that the bright line that I would like to see is a lot earlier in the process than that of Representative Nash.
Okay, thank you, Representative.
And I would urge members to vote.
Okay, thank you. And we will take a roll call requested. Representative Dean?
No.
Representative Bonner?
No.
Representative Nash?
Yes.
Representative Bernardi?
No.
Representative Halverson? Representative Mann? No. Representative New? And Representative O'Driscoll.
Yes.
With 4 nays and 2 ayes and 2 absent,
Okay, there, with 4 nays and 2 ayes, 2 absent, the amendment fails.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I would move the
Representative Nash.
A4 and ask for a roll call.
Representative Nash moves amendment A4 and requests a roll call. Would you like to make comments?
And Madam Chair, thank you, members. Again, this is another amendment that addresses a particularly violent and heinous crime. This is for violence and bodily harm. Again, I think that this is the bright line that if the author is truly looking to create a bright line, that this would be one that oversight should agree to, and I would urge its adoption.
This guy's stalling everything.
Would you like to
Madam Chair, while I appreciate Representative Nash's comments, again, I believe that there exists for those who are currently locked up, that they cannot vote, for those that are out in the community expected to live their best life possible, that they would be allowed to vote. So I would recommend members that we vote on this amendment.
Great. Is there any discussion? Okay, with that, we will roll.
Representative Dean?
No.
Representative Vaughn?
No.
Representative Nash?
Yes.
Representative Bernardi?
No.
Representative Halberstam? Representative Mann? No. Representative Newton? Representative Driscoll?
Yes.
So for amendment amendment 4, there are,
To our testifiers, and just to remind members and testifiers about 2 or 3 minutes for the testifier, and actually this 4 minutes or so for questions instead of going through all of the testifiers and trying to remember those questions. We'll actually allow the questions to take place at the time. So I'd like to turn it over to Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman.
okay, welcome to the committee.
Madam Chair, members, I'm Mike Freeman. I'm the duly elected Hennepin County Attorney. I recall sitting in this room all night long on a capital bonding bill when I had the privilege of being in the Minnesota Senate. So thank you for welcoming me back, Madam Chair. I'm proud to be here today with a number of organizations and lots of good folks to say it is time to restore the vote. We need to restore the vote to those who have been incarcerated and now have been released. They have served their time and they deserve the right to vote. It is the right thing to do. First, restoring voting rights to everyone living in our community is a matter of justice. Disenfranchisement of our neighbors on probation and parole serves no legitimate penal function, and it serves no legitimate electoral function. And I don't think anyone can seriously suggest that denying a person on parole the right to vote deters crime in any way. Instead, it's a vestige of the past, where most people couldn't vote. And the franchise was reserved for the privileged few, white men over the age of 21 who own property. But in the last 2 centuries, we've set those notions aside. We've come to see voting as a fundamental right of citizenship. Our campaign to restore the vote modernizes our law, and it helps us to live up to that vision. Second, a broad cross-section of the law enforcement community believes that restoring the voting rights is good for public safety. The Minnesota County Attorneys Association has unanimously voted to support this bill in previous years, and reiterates that to you, Mr. Chairman. As a society, we've decided that neighbors on probation and parole deserve a second chance to live in our communities and take on the rights and obligations of citizenship. Voting is one of the most sacred rights of citizenship. It makes no sense to exclude our neighbors from that act. It is punitive, and it does not help people returning to the path of full citizenship. Third, and something we in law enforcement, and particularly prosecutors, know very well, it is confusing, burdensome, and expensive to enforce. Every year, many people who are entitled to vote fail to do so because they are concerned about violating the law. And every year, disenfranchised people who misunderstand the law get themselves in trouble by voting. And we have to investigate each of those allegations and review each of those cases. And let me tell Madam Chair, you and members of the committee, it's expensive, and we end up prosecuting 3 or 4 people a year, and they receive public service. It really is a law that should not be on the books. And so in conclusion, restoring the vote is a simple, basic step to enhance our democracy. The time has come. I urge this committee and this legislature to pass Representative Dean's bill as presently drafted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, County Attorney Mike Freeman. Questions? Any other questions by our members? So with that, we'll move on to our next testifier, our State Secretary of State, Steve Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. As Secretary of State, I think we need to keep investing in our democracy, and part of that means investing in people. I often like to say that I'm in the democracy business, and redemption is good for business. Today in Minnesota, as we've heard, approximately 50,000 people who would otherwise be eligible to vote are ineligible because they have a felony conviction, even though they have done their time, they're putting their lives back together, they're working, they're paying taxes, and they have not yet had their civil rights restored. We should want people who have left prison behind to feel invested, to feel a sense of ownership, to feel a sense of agency. And one really good way to do that is to make sure they feel that they have a choice in who governs them and how. So restoring the right to vote at the end of a prison term will give real opportunities to those who have left prison behind to become full members of their communities and our society. To set an example for their children, research has shown that children are more likely to vote as adults if their parents voted, if they grew up in a house where voting was a thing. And so we may inadvertently right now be disenfranchising one generation and future generations. And this isn't just good for the ex-offender, it's good for all the rest of us too. We want people to feel invested in society so that they don't re-offend, so they don't take the wrong path, so they don't end up back where they once were. I have to add that restoring the right to vote is not a DFL or GOP idea. I'm happy to see that there is broad bipartisan support. And look at other states. Look at the state of Florida. They can't agree on anything. In 2018, they had a recount in the governor's race, a recount in their U.S. Senate race, but in that same year, in that same election just a few months ago, where it was 50-50 and everything else, 61% of voters in Florida voted to move in the direction of re-enfranchisement for those who have left prison behind. 61%. They couldn't agree on anything else, but they really agreed in landslide proportions on that. So this law that we're talking about right now on the books has been with us since statehood. And in the 1850s and 1860s, there was no such thing as probation or supervised release. There were only a few felony crimes. Now there are over 300 felony crimes, or 350, I should say. And we have over 50,000 people who are not enfranchised. So I have to say, the confusion that County Attorney Freeman talked about goes both ways. Tragically, as he mentioned in his office, there are people who are confused in the sense of maybe they think we're like North Dakota, maybe they believe that being out of prison they can vote. That's mistaken, and tragically so, and they go and do the wrong thing, and they have to be prosecuted. But confusion goes the other way as well. I will tell you, since I used to be among you as a state representative, I did a lot of door knocking, pretty obsessed with it, and every cycle, for 5 cycles, every single time, I would knock on a door, and this kind of thing would happen. I would hand them a brochure, they would look it up and down, they would look me up and down, and they would say, sounds great, you sound great, you would have my vote, but I can't vote for you. And I'd say, why not? And they'd say, well, I committed a felony 20 years ago. And I'd say, oh, are you still on paper? Are you still under a probationary sentence or on supervised release or something? Oh, no, I've been off paper for 10 years. In other words, for 10 years, they could have voted but didn't. They were confused about the law. So that confusion goes both ways, and that's one reason why, from just an administrative standpoint, this really makes sense as well. So this bill would make it easier to administer elections, eliminate confusion of the polls, and boost positive participation in society. So now I think it's important for Minnesota to join a growing number of states who are returning full civil rights to those who have left prison behind. I hope Minnesota can join those other states and walk that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary of State Steve Simon. Do members have any questions? Thank you. We are now going to move on to our next testifier, the Department of Corrections Commissioner, Paul Schnell. And up on deck, if they can be ready, is the Intergovernmental Relations Office of the Mayor of St. Paul, Tony. Commissioner Schnell, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. My name is Paul Schnell. I'm the new Commissioner of Corrections for the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Voting engages people in the democratic process. And we know that full engagement and in connection with the community is among the best measures of pro-social participation. Voting is part and parcel to community engagement. I recently met a man who was convicted of a felony and remains under supervision. He explained the irony that he was allowed to attend a school board meeting where they were discussing a policy that would have a direct impact on his children. But he was prohibited from voting for the very officials who were making up the school board itself. And he went on to remark that explaining this difference, explaining the reality that he could, one, participate but not vote, was very difficult for his teenage children to wrap their heads around. Finally and importantly, after more than 30 years of working in public safety in a variety of different areas, I will say that I see no adverse impact on public safety by allowing individuals the right to vote after they have completed their time in custody. It simply makes good sense. We stand in support of this bill and we urge its passage.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Members, do you have any questions? Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Commissioner, complicated issue. Certainly, you can tell from the testifier or the crowd here that's it's a big issue. But so, what can we, as the state or the courts, do to lessen the dependence, if you wish, on probation? We have very long probation periods. What is your suggestion?
Commissioner Schnell.
Madam Chair, Representative, I do believe that there are a number of measures that are in consideration, that are being discussed by the House of Representatives as well as in the Senate, around looking at ways that we can address the links in terms of probation. But ultimately, I think the key issue here is that probation is in fact the time where we should be engaging people. That is the time when we want to really focus on recreating, reestablishing, and building and deepening community engagement and participation. Ultimately, that's the measure of success for us. Those are the ways in which we ultimately ensure that people do well in our communities. It is that connection, and probation and supervised release are the way in which we help people do that.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I guess I was looking for some mechanics from your perspective as to what are you suggesting, or maybe perhaps the author, other than if this bill were to not become law, what are some of the mechanics that either of you would suggest?
Commissioner Schnell.
Madam Chair, I guess just for a point of clarification, you're talking specifically about reducing probation terms?
Representative Nash.
Madam Chair, yes.
Commissioner Schnell.
I think one of the things that it has little relevance, I think, on the issue of voting in and of itself. Fundamentally, the issue of voting, I think, as this bill points out, is really focused on engagement. At the same time, as it relates, we're talking about engagement of people in civic and democratic process. As it relates to probation terms specifically, I think we are looking at ways in which either the Sentencing Guidelines Commission could be engaged in those discussions around some of the reduction of probationary terms to do what's effective, and there is good science and good measures around what we know the science tells us around effectiveness of probation terms. And I think we need to engage our partners across the criminal justice system to try and really look at doing that, reducing those terms to reasonable levels to ensure that people have adequate opportunity to engage in the community and democratic process.
And Madam Chair, Representative Nash, I will just add that, the probation periods that we have in the state of Minnesota are in many ways disproportional to other states. We tend to use that, as has often been discussed, as a way of handing down sentences that don't include time locked up. We have one of the lower rates of individuals that are incarcerated and locked up in the state of Minnesota nationwide, but we have one of the highest relative to the number of people in probation. Now, when we talk about length of time of probation, I think there are plenty of studies that show that the length of time does very little to impact what I would say is preventing the commission of new crimes. Generally, for individuals that receive probation, generally, if they reoffend, they tend to reoffend in the first few years. They don't tend to reoffend in year 15 or year 20 or year 25, or in some cases, all the way up to 40 years. Yesterday, there was testimony from a young woman who had a 40-year probation sentence. She will be off probation if she does not get an early release when she's 71. This was for a drug crime. So I think that when we talk about probation, that's a topic that we need to talk about, because we do have an unbalanced system of the way we deal with probation. But I think relative to this notion of voting, we know that pro-civic behavior for individuals who are out there are one of the best deterrents for an individual committing another crime. So I think in many ways, when we think about allowing individuals to vote while they're still under probation is one of those things that we help them engage the community, ultimately become the citizens that a lot of us view as the citizens we want them to be.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schnell. Now we have Intergovernment Relations Office. Now we have the Intergovernmental Relations from the Office of the Mayor of St. Paul, Tao Mei. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for the record, my name is Tao Mei Chong, and I'm the Director of Intergovernmental Relations for the City of St. Paul in Mayor Melvin Carter's office. First, the Mayor wants to thank the Chief Bill Author and all the co-authors on this bill for their courage and leadership on this issue. He apologizes that he's not able to be here in person, but welcomes the opportunity in the future. I'm going to read a statement from the Mayor, and I'm going to summarize it because it's a full page and I'm going to keep it short. Dear Chair Dean, I write to urge the members of the Minnesota House Subcommittee on Elections to support House File 40 to restore the vote. In St. Paul, we are working hard to connect with our residents as we make policies that impact their lives. In as many ways as possible, we try to engage residents in ongoing dialogue to determine what it looks like to make a city that works for all of us. We know that our city is stronger when we have more voices at the table and more perspectives informing our policy decisions. For us, this includes those who have been formally incarcerated. While we can encourage these residents to come to community meetings or contact us with their concerns, voting is the most fundamental form of citizen engagement. Restoring the right to vote allows full participation of our community members to participate in our democratic process. Again, I ask you and the members of the committee to support this legislation so we can fully welcome our residents back into our community and participate in the civic life of our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And I would like to correct it for the record for my benefit. Tao Mei Chong. Yes. Thank you very much. Are there questions from members? Okay, we can move on to our next testifier, which is Jason Atkins from Minnesota Catholic Conference, and up on deck is George.
Can be unable to vote for 20 or 30 years despite good behavior. That makes no sense. An individual's civil right to vote should be restored when incarceration is completed. Please vote in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And to our committee. And on deck is Pastor Brian Heron. Heron, thank you. Zion Baptist Church of Isaiah. You could please come to the testifiers table. And then on deck is Take Action Minnesota. They can be seated up front too. That would be helpful on the waiting in the wings there. So welcome to the committee, Kathy Swenson. If you could spell your name for our viewing.
Thank you, Chair Dean, and for offering this bill. And thank you to the committee for allowing me to testify. As you stated, I'm the Blaine City Clerk, and I also serve as the chair of the Elections Task Force for the League of Minnesota Cities. And it is in that capacity that I'm here today to testify in support of House File 40. The task force is made up of state election administrators throughout the state, and we help create, advise, and implement the League's legislative platform on elections. The League of Minnesota Cities supports the restoration of voting rights to felons once they have completed their term of incarceration. And we oppose the loss of voting rights for felons who serve the entirety of their sentence in the community and are not incarcerated. Along with our county partners, cities are the front lines for administering elections throughout the state. From registering first-time voters to handing out the beloved I voted stickers, we are wholly committed to ensuring that eligible voters have the best voting experience possible at every step. We support this legislation because it is us. It's our election judges on the front line who must carry out the challenges when someone with a felony appears before us to vote, whether that person is doing so knowingly or unknowingly. Administering the voter challenge is an uncomfortable experience for all involved, nearby voters that may be hearing, election judges, but especially the voter. By making it very clear that if a felon is no longer incarcerated or was never incarcerated and therefore able to vote, there will be less confusion for our election judges, administrators, and more importantly, provides the best voter experience. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Sorensen. Do you have any questions for our testifier? Yes, Representative Helmerson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think that anytime we have anyone who serves as an election judge at the table, we all owe you a big thank you. That's all.
Amazing election judges in this meeting also. Thank you.
Thank you. That would be great. And say who you with.
Brian, B-R-I-A-N, Herron, H-E-R-R-O-N. I am with Isaiah, the clergy leadership, the Black Community Collective of Isaiah. I also represent the State Baptist Convention as chair of the Social Justice Committee. Here to support the Restore the Vote and the bill by the chair in the fullness of how it is written. One of the things that we have to ask is, to what end do we not allow people to vote? What good is it serving? I don't think we understand the continuum of punishment. When somebody gets out of incarceration, first of all, they're locked up. Now they're locked out. They're locked out of employment opportunities. They're locked out of being able to vote. They're locked out of being able to take care of their families. That doesn't help us to have safe streets and safe neighborhoods. If we want safe streets and safe neighborhoods, then we can't be tough on crime. We got to be smart on crime. And we have to begin to do things that help people to re-engage and be reinvested in community. As one who has been incarcerated and couldn't vote, I know the pain of that. And I know the feeling of not being able to participate. So I want to urge you today to restore the vote. This is about redemption. If we don't believe that people can change, then none of us can change. And there's no redemption for any of us. We have to believe in redemption. And we have to believe that people have the ability to change. Probation is a whole nother issue because that's all messed up. Probation is not distributed equally. In Duluth it's one way, in Rochester the sentences of the terms are longer, and we have some of the longest probation terms of any state. And so probation isn't the issue. The issue is restoring people's rights when they have paid their debt to society, allowing them to re-engage in society so that they can be successful. Facts show that people who are pro-social, re-engaged in society are least likely to re-offend. All the states who have voter restoration show that their recidivism rates are lower. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Pastor Herron. Take Action Minnesota will be testifying next in the Women's March.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can you ask if anyone has
Yes.
any questions?
Sure. Thank you, Geraldine. Appreciate that. Any questions by our members for our testifier? Representative Bonner.
Madam Chair, Representative Dean, and Pastor Herron. I just wanted to actually quickly make a comment and say thank you so much for being here. And I really appreciate what you said about being locked up and locked out. I think that is the underlying message we need to underscore for today. And to understand that while we all appreciate in the name of justice that folks accept that if you do the crime, so to speak, you do the time, right? But once that time has been served, and once that debt to society has been paid, folks should be able to have their rights restored. And I want to thank you for making that important point and underscoring that for us today and for all of your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. We will move on to our next testifier from Take Action. If you could introduce yourself and spell your name for the record. Appreciate that.
Hi, my name is Mary Spalding. My first name is spelled M-A-R-Y. My last name is spelled S-P-A-U-L-D-I-N-G. And I am a leader with Take Action Minnesota. I am also the director of Political Healers Justice, an organization in Minnesota. And I'm here today because I'm actually a felon. There was a time when I was on probation, actually parole. And during that time, there was a big decision being made about my kids' education, saying, do we raise taxes to pay for more after-school activities in school? And I couldn't vote because I knew if I did, even though it was a very important issue to me because my children's education is the most important thing to me, that I would actually be causing a crime. That bill that actually people were voting on didn't pass due to the fact that there were so many people that in my community that couldn't vote and didn't know what the bill was actually about. But it hurt so much because I literally didn't have a voice during that time on what I wanted to be done for my children and their education. And I feel that whenever a mother, a person, doesn't have a voice not only about their own life, but then how they're going to raise their children and how their children are being educated, it affects every single one of us. Before that and even after that, I've been an avid voter. I never missed the time that I couldn't vote, other than when I couldn't vote because I was on parole. I still every day regret that I wasn't able to vote. I regret the decisions that I made that made me be able to be on parole and probation, but I would not change any decisions that I've ever made when I voted. I've always voted with my heart and my soul, and I believe that if we don't restore people's rights to vote, we're not only affecting people like me, but we affect my children and their children and my grandchildren. And if they don't have a voice and actually have somebody to look up to and see that they're voting on a regular basis, they don't vote. And for me, that's one of the biggest things that I've ever gave to my kids, is the opportunity to know that they can vote and how to vote.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Spalding. And you brought a guest with you today.
This is Riley Spalding King.
Hi, welcome to the committee today, Riley. Thanks for comment. Do we have any questions by our members? Thank you very much for your testimony. Up next is Jennifer Colson, the Executive Director of Tubman.
It's many forms of trauma, relationship violence, assault, exploitation and trafficking, addiction, homelessness, and more. In addition to our crisis intervention services, to address their immediate safety and needs and well-being, we also work alongside them for long-term stability, personal achievement, and healing after that trauma. For many of the survivors and families with whom we work, a critical piece of that long-term stability is rebuilding connections. Many have been isolated by abusive partners or traffickers, or they've lost relationships because of addiction, or have been pushed to the margins of society by homelessness and poverty. Many are teenagers or young people impacted by these issues who are still figuring out their place in the world. And some have criminal records. We work with them to resolve any criminal justice issues they have, and then we help them move forward into their future. Voting is one important piece of rebuilding those connections. The right to vote is a fundamental piece of our democracy. It encourages participation in civic life. It motivates law-abiding behavior and rebuilds those all too important connections and ties to neighborhood and community. Our organization is named after Harriet Tubman, conductor on the Underground Railroad, Civil War soldier, suffragette, and much more. Harriet's life's work was helping people be free, and then helping freed slaves and many others realize the promise of America. During her lifetime, felony disenfranchisement laws were one tool used to systematically prevent freed Black Americans from participating in elections. And today, we know those laws continue to disproportionately impact minority and marginalized communities. This is not a legacy we wish to continue in Minnesota. Anything that effectively creates second-class citizenship in this country is a betrayal of all that Harriet Tubman fought. Tubman's vision for the future is one of thriving people, healthy relationships, and peaceful communities. Preventing people from voting does not help them to thrive. It does not create peaceful and engaged communities. We must do better, and today we have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Halsey. Any questions from our members? Okay, thank you. Our next testifier is Rob Stewart. You can say your stuff.
Thank you, state leaders and the members of the public who are here today. My name is Rob Stewart, R-O-B-S-T-E-W-A-R-T. And I would like to voice my strong support for House File 40. Like tens of thousands of other Minnesotans, this is a very personal issue for me, because not only am I a father and a husband, the executive director of a nonprofit, and a doctoral candidate at the University of Minnesota, but I'm also a felon who couldn't vote for almost 10 years. I'm from Owatonna, and in my 20s, I made choices that I'm not proud of, and I was convicted of felony drug possession. In the more than 2 years I was incarcerated, I sobered up, I participated in various programs, and enrolled in college courses. And I also began to invest my energy in making amends and doing what I could do to give back to the community through tutoring and volunteering, which I continued after my release. When I got out, I tried to get my life back on track. But anyone with a felony record can tell you that everything in your life gets much harder. Trying to find someone who will hire you, trying to find a landlord who will rent to you, and even trying to find a college that's willing to accept you. And on top of that, you can't vote. As Commissioner Schnell mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter that you might have kids in the local school district and want to vote on the school funding referendum, or that you own a business and are directly impacted by the decisions made by the city or state governments, or that you're paying taxes. As citizens, we vote because we're invested in the future of our towns, our state, and our country. Who we let vote sends a signal whose voices we value and who we include as part of our communities. So for me, even though I was living in the community, every election became a reminder that I was an outsider, that I wasn't included as part of my community, of our community, and my voice didn't matter. To be perfectly honest, I was tempted to just check out, stop hearing. The irony, of course, is that we expect people involved in the criminal justice system to become productive citizens who are engaged in their community. Yet, we block them from participating in the most basic, the most fundamental of duties of citizenship. So the reality is that the roughly 52,000 Minnesotans that we're talking about are our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, and our family members. So I ask, shouldn't we do what we can to encourage their investment in their own futures, their families' futures, and the futures of our communities? As for my own situation, I'm happy to report that my life has taken a very positive direction since my conviction. I got married, and we have a perfect 15-month-old little girl and a little boy coming in April. I finished my bachelor's, summa cum laude, from the University of Minnesota, and I'm almost finished with my PhD, where my research focuses on barriers to successful reentry and reintegration following criminal justice involvement. And things are going well. But I can honestly tell you that it wasn't until I finally got the right to vote back that I started to feel whole again, that I started to feel like I was part of our community. It was really important to me, and I know it's really important to thousands of other Minnesotans who still can't vote. So I encourage you to support felon voting rights restoration and House File 40.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Stewart. Do our members have any questions? Representative Bond.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Dean, Mr. Stewart. I want to commend you first off for obviously making an incredible turnaround in your life, and you are clearly a success story here today before us. One of the things that really stood out to me, and I know you spoke to this about the difficulties that a lot of felons face finding housing, getting accepted to school, those kinds of finding a job, those kinds of things. But you also mentioned that you have also a unique perspective as a dad, as a business owner, and you know, a standing citizen in our community. And I'm just curious how not being able to vote has impacted those aspects of your life as a business owner and as a father, and what that meant to you. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Bonner. It's been a really difficult process. You know, like I said, we have a 15-month-old, and we're looking at things like preschools and all that type of stuff, which seems like it's really early to do that, but I guess that's what you do. But honestly, I don't know what there's a sense of a feeling of helplessness that pervades this experience that I don't know that necessarily it has been touched on. There's a sense that there's nothing that you can do. You can only come so far, and but that's as far as you can go. And so when it comes to things like running an organization and trying to engage with city leaders and that type of thing, but not actually being a voter, not being able to say yes, I'm one of your voters or whatever. It not only kind of frustrates that type of relationship, but it's incredibly awkward, right? I mean, here I am a parent, here I am, I'm running a nonprofit, and now I can vote, but previously when I couldn't, having to bring that up to people in completely unrelated situations, right? So yeah, I would say that there's a sense of helplessness that's really hard to put into words, I think.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to ask a question? Mr. Stewart? Okay, well, thank you. The last testifier on our list before we move to public testimony. Chair, do you have any comments? I have Amity.
Madam Chair, I believe that's the next bill.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Really? Thank you. Do we have?
I believe our list is
exhausted. Thank you. And now we're going to provide test people who in the audience would like to testify.
Well, we only have a few minutes
because
we do have another bill on the agenda, Madam Chair. I would think that we might have time for one or two testifiers from the audience if there are a couple individuals who want to raise their hands and want to be bold and come up and say a few words. Yes. We have one taker. Is there another person who would like to come up? I think that we should have Anika Bowie come up and speak as well. So why don't you all come up and we'll give you a couple minutes and we'll have a couple questions. As a reminder to other members of the public that we will have opportunities in other committee stops as we move forward.
Okay, so Chair Dean, that's your decision, correct?
Yes, I just changed the rules a little bit, Madam Chair. Thank you. So I'd like to turn it over to Renee to speak, and she will tell a little bit about herself and why she supports this.
And what I'd like to do is I'd like to make sure that we keep decorum and that there's no clapping. The testifier will have 2 minutes, and if the we'll ask our members if they have questions preceding after the testifier is done speaking. And so thank you. Please say your name and spell it for the record and who you're with. Thank you.
My name is Renee Brown Goodell, R-E-N-E-E, Brown, as the color. Goodell, G-O-O-D-E-L-L, as we like to say in that family, like Roger, but nobody hates us. I am here only for one reason. I'm a felon. I'm a federal felon. I am still on probation and supervised release. None of the current political situation is my fault. I haven't been able to vote since 2011. Having said that, it is something that is very, very dear to me. But I come off of paper in 91 days. On May 15th, my right is restored by law in Minnesota. I will be voting again. But I did time in Waseca for 39 months with at least 500 to 700 ladies who don't have the same advantages I have. They don't have the same background, they don't have the same support, they don't have the same education. They don't have the same belief in themselves that their voice matters. And I think as a system, when we disenfranchise people and tell them that they don't matter and they are not good enough to speak out, we send a horrible message. The ladies that I lived with didn't look like me. We were very different as day and night. And the reality is that they came from lives of severe trauma, abuse, just horrible places. And that is the bulwark of federal prison in America. And if you can stand next to me in the line at Cub while we are checking out and look me in the eye and say, you're not good enough to vote, and then do it tomorrow and do it the next day, but then all of a sudden on May 16th, look at me and say, hey, who are you going to vote for? Then I think you have a reasonable argument that this disenfranchisement that we currently live under makes sense. I would like to encourage Commissioner Schnell to encourage voting education while people are incarcerated, because so many people don't even understand it before they're released after they're registered. Explain it to people. I'm not going to recover all the reasons being good, because that's already been said. What I am telling you is that we need to start re-empowering the women and the men that we beat down in the system and come in that way. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll move on to our next testifier, and if you could say your name and spell it for the record and who you're with, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Anika Bowie, A-N-I-K-A-B-O-W-I-E. I am the lead organizer of the Restore the Vote Minnesota Coalition, as well as vice president of Minneapolis NAACP. And I am here because we are educators, we are parents, we are legal experts, we are criminal justice reformers, we are lawmakers, and we are in support of House File 40. We are in support of Restore the Vote. We are also people with felony convictions, but that does not tell the entire story. As teachers, as parents, and business owners, and veterans, we support these members of society to fully integrate back into our communities, save communities, contribute to communities. We also support members of society to be voters. And the big question is, what is that going to take? Yes, that's going to take this bill to be passed through committees. It's also going to ask us, what is it going to take for us to trust and forgive and to change the label and the stigma of what we call, or who we call, criminals? And also, it's going to take this change of idea of rehabilitation, and does it work? And in Minnesota, we have the Department of Correction Commissioner here saying that he supports Restore the Vote. And in Minnesota, we have a rehabilitation process that we tell people once they go through our court system, our prison system, our probation system, and while they're in community, that they are being rehabilitated. They are changing their lives. And they're doing that inside of our schools, inside of our jobs, our families, and churches. And we ask that we also include them inside of our elections, inside of our voting booths. And very briefly, I have a story. A few days ago, I had the honor to support my uncle who was being released from prison. I took an hour-long drive up there with my friend Leslie Redman, who's also the president of Minneapolis NAACP. We talked about the criminal justice system and how those who are incarcerated not only are locked out, but the family members who support them are also suffering from that stigma. And we got there and picked him up, and he was so happy. We gave him a big hug. After 7 years in prison, he was able to be a free man. And he had so much paperwork. He was excited about, I just earned my driver's license. He has a job. He secured housing. And he had a paper by Secretary of State Steve Simon that said that he had the right to vote. And with him being, returning citizen, I want to make sure that he is always law-abiding. And I had to share with him that it's complicated. That with him being on parole, it's complicated. but that what I'm doing, what many people in this room is doing right now, is advocating for him to speak in truth of him having his right to vote. Integrating into society should not be complicated. Your laws, the voting laws, should not be complicated for those who are returning home. And we urge everyone to restore the vote and pass House File 40. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Bowie. Is there any, do our members have any questions for either of the testifiers? Representative Hellerson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to raise up something that I heard from Ms. Bowie, and that is you use the language that people with felonies, that we're talking about people with felonies. Too often I hear the words felons, right? Yes. I have diabetes, and I cringe when everyone says you're diabetic, because I'm way more than a diagnosis.
Right.
I'm way more than an action. And so I just appreciated that language, and I wanted to raise it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we have one other testifier, and he'll be brief, and then we'll all move to closing comments, and hopefully we'll move on to vote on this.
Thank you and welcome to our committee. If you could state your name and spell it for the record, and if you're representing somebody, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. And my name is George Gibson, Gipson. I'm here representing Next Step Services, but more than that, I'm a veteran. I'm a business owner. I also have a number which was 0604341, which means that I was also a felon, which I prefer to say returning citizen. For me, if we boil this all down, there's some very strong pieces for me as a vet. And part of that piece is that I can be a business owner, pay all of my taxes, pay all of my property taxes, pay all of the taxes that are required, yet I can't have a say in government. So taxation without representation for me is a critical piece of what I signed on to defend the Constitution. I think that anytime that we move voter registration or not being able to vote, and we move that into a disenfranchised piece of punishment, then we've missed the point. The point is that if there's any of us that are working, paying our taxes, being a part of community, then we should be able to be represented by our government, of which we have an opportunity to vote for. I think that's a fundamental constitutional right. And I think that every party across the board should be concerned anytime that we move taxation without representation into voter disenfranchisement, that's a very serious piece. It was a very serious piece for the state of Minnesota when it was at the very foundation of moving disenfranchised voters onto one side of the fence or the other. And I think that if we are going to be responsible citizens and say, as part of probation, that you have to have a job and you have to go to work, then you should also, and they'll have to be paying taxes, obviously, that they should also have the ability to vote for their school board, for my representative, for the President of the United States. That's just fundamental constitutional law for me. And so today I had the privilege of going in for my VA clinical appointment. And I happened to bring, they all asked, why are you suited and booted today, Mr. Gibson? And I replied that I was coming here. And they asked why. And when I spoke to the nurse, when I spoke to the doctor, when I spoke to the other two vets that were sitting next to me in line, they were all in awe that anyone that is paying their taxes could vote. And so I would implore you to move this from a punishment piece into a piece of restoration, because there are a lot of great individuals out here that deserve the right to vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Gibson. So, any questions from our members? So, Representative Dean, it's my understanding that you would like to move on to your
I'll wrap up very quickly, Madam Chair, and we have a few minutes for discussion. If folks want to discuss, and then I believe we should go to a vote. The next bill is a pretty clear bill, and my voting rights. It was common knowledge amongst individuals that have felony records that you can never vote. And that's still, unfortunately, common knowledge for a lot of other individuals. I went to another extreme and I decided that I wanted to really vote. Voting was really critical to me. So I applied for a pardon. And I ultimately received a pardon from the state of Minnesota. And so I was able to live my life for a long period of time as if I'd never committed a crime. Well, now I'm pretty public about it, so I can't live as if I've never committed a crime. But I wanted to spell a few myths. One of the things that we heard from a few testifiers was issues of addiction. And in some ways, we are penalizing people with addiction that end up committing crimes because they are losing their right to vote. We also know disproportionately that people impacted our communities of color relative to individuals convicted of crimes for similar behavior that other individuals don't get the same types of sentences and the same types of crimes. This is definitely something that will help reduce recidivism. And I also wanted to dispel the myth about this is a Democratic thing, it's going to help Democrats. We know that roughly 65% of the people that currently can't vote in the state of Minnesota live outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I tell a lot of my colleagues that one thing you can count on voters is they generally vote their geography. And if you look at the voting map from this past year in the state of Minnesota, you would see that many individuals out in rural parts of the state of Minnesota, they tended to vote Republican. And of course, those in Minneapolis and St. Paul tended to vote Democrat. So I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think this impacts both parties the same, and that we need to start to move forward. And I believe it's time for Minnesota to move forward and update the way in which we treat those individuals who we expect to be great citizens and do all those right things. So I encourage members to support House File 40, and I look forward to moving it on back to government operations.
Thank you. So I would thank you very much for your remarks. Is there any, I am not aware of any other amendments for this bill. Okay. Is there any further discussion of this bill? Representative Halverson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just quickly want to say that it's clearly that there's a time for this policy, and the time is now for us to move forward with this voting restoration. We have heard and learned more every single year about the roots that these kinds of policies around the country have had in racial injustice. I spent some time in Montgomery, Alabama, and Selma, Alabama this summer learning about the roots of these policies. I spent some time at the Equal Justice Initiative, and it's astonishing to me that the language we continue to use in order to keep these policies in place, our language, as the representative from Tubman said, that has its roots in the Civil War and incarceration dating back to those days. And so this has strong bipartisan support, which I think tells us that it's time to move forward. It's time to make sure that people in Minnesota who are participating in their communities, who are raising their children, who are paying their taxes and working, have the opportunity to petition their government and choose who represents them. And I will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Dean moved his motion that House File 40, as amended, be referred to the Committee on Government Operations. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The motion does prevail. Oh, excuse me. No, I'm supposed to do that. I was thinking I was adjourning the meeting. We have more work to do. I'm so excited about this bill. So thank you very much. Now, Chair, we have another bill, and hopefully we can get through and